I'd like to continue where we left off last session in terms of our cerebrospinal fluid discussion. I put a link there in the chat. This paper came out in October of this year, so it's fairly recent. And I'm just going to share my screen. We're not going to go through the paper itself, but Science Alert does a pretty good job of reviewing the paper a bit. Essentially, we discussed a lot about what the cerebrospinal fluid does in the brain, and so if you missed that, it's last session. You can review that. We also discussed some of the possible functions of the cerebrospinal fluid that maybe have not been discovered yet, being more as a transmitter of energy, electricity, kundalini, whatever it might be, and how many people aren't aware of this fluid, and that the most basic exercise to do is to look at an anatomy, look at the anatomy of the ventricles of the fluid in the brain, know where it is located, and just pay attention to it. Bring your attention to that. That's it. And see what you notice. That's the most basic sort of exercise on this whatsoever. If you do get any sort of, if it resonates with you at all, pay attention to some of the research that's going to come out on this, because it's very, very powerful. It's going to be very powerful. And I share with you my screen here. Study suggests spins of brain water could mean our minds use quantum computation. So this study is actually looking at the spin of the electrons in the brain water, or the fluid in the brain, also known as cerebrospinal fluid, and that based on what they've seen, that maybe there's actually properties of the brain water, of this brain fluid, that could act as a quantum computer, being able to store data at the quantum level, and being able to compute, to have computational ability at the quantum level, which makes it much more elaborate and intricate than, say, regular computing. And we knew this. It was just the mechanism that the brain was actually doing this wasn't fully understood. So I'm just going to read this. In the ongoing work to realize the full potential of quantum computing, scientists could perhaps try peering into our own brains to see what's possible. A new study suggests that the brain actually has a lot in common with a quantum computer. Okay. The findings could teach us a lot about the functions of neurons, as well as the fundamentals of quantum mechanics. The research might explain, for example, why our brains are still able to outperform supercomputers on certain tasks, such as making decisions or learning new information. As with much quantum computing research, the study looks at the idea of entanglement, two separate particles being in states that are linked together. We adapted an idea developed for experiments to prove the existence of quantum gravity, whereby you take known quantum systems which interact with an unknown system, says this physicist from the University of Dublin. If the known systems entangle, then the unknown must be a quantum system. It circumvents the difficulties to find measuring devices for something we know nothing about. In other words, the entanglement or relationship between the known systems can only happen if the mediating system in the middle, the unknown system, operates on a quantum level too. While the unknown system can't be studied directly, its effects can be observed as with quantum gravity. For the purpose of this research, the proton spins of brain water. All right, so they looked at the spinning protons that make up brain water, the fluid that builds up in the brain, act as the known system with custom magnetic resonance imaging scans used to non-invasively measure the proton activity. The spin of a particle, which determines its magnetic and electrical properties, is a quantum mechanical property. Through this technique, the researchers were able to see signals resembling heartbeat evoked potentials, which are a type of EEG, electroencephalography signal. These signals aren't normally detectable via MRI, and the thinking is that they showed up because the nuclear proton spins in the brain were entangled. So they saw this spinning, they saw this signal that was arising, not because of what the MRI could show, but because of these protons. There was actually entanglement of the protons within the brain water itself. The observations recorded by the team require verification via confirmation via future studies across multiple scientific fields. This is sort of the classic, more research needs to be done. But the early results look promising for non-classical quantum happenings in the human brain when it's active. If entanglement is the only possible explanation here, then that would mean that brain processes must have interacted with the nuclear spins, mediating the entanglement between the nuclear spins. As a result, we can deduce that those brain functions must be quantum. The brain functions that lit up the MRI readings were also associated with short-term memory and conscious awareness. And that suggests the quantum process, if that's indeed what they are, play a crucial role in cognition and consciousness. What research needs to do next is to learn more about this unknown quantum system in the brain, and then we might fully understand the workings of the quantum computer that we are carrying around in our heads. Pretty good, huh? So this is sort of what is the are you in, what kind of relationship are you in with the quantum computer that you are carrying around in your own head? Mostly, which I would argue, is going to come from understanding the natures of this fluid that not only bathes the ventricles, these large cavities in the brain, but also, as we discussed last time, that like we discussed last time, that during sleep, or what I would argue is states of, let's say, parasympathetic activity, including meditation or body work or anything to that nature, that this fluid is actually able to, it doesn't just stay in these cavities, it actually penetrates the brain and it goes into the tissue. So when we look at it, it's not like it's separate. It's not like it's like in a vessel and it just stays there. It's a continuum. It's a continuum from the lake, the beautiful crystal lake that's present in the middle of your brain, and that lake then bathes the brain tissue. It provides nutrients and moisture and signaling and information to the brain tissue, and it can actually go into the brain tissue, and it does, and we know this mostly occurs with sleep, etc. But that the fluid actually goes into the brain tissue, cleans out any debris, but can also bring any information that is necessary, right, to the brain, including information on a quantum level, right? How these electrons and protons and smaller subatomic particles are actually storing data and information, and that a download of information or a movement of energy it could be, in my opinion, from the hypothesis that I've put forward, is essentially that it interacts with the fluid system first. It comes in through the fluid system, that the fluid can act. I think I've said this as a quantum computer, and with that we have all the properties of quantum mechanics within the fluid itself. And so therefore, to just kind of keep your eye out on research that comes out in the next few years, which is going to be absolutely fascinating, I guarantee you, but shouldn't stop us from doing some of the meditations, or simply bringing your attention to the cerebrospinal fluid itself and seeing and starting to work with it yourself consciously, and seeing what your experience is. The thing that we talked about last time, which, just to review, because it is going to be in this meditation, is the breath. And so how the breath actually is able to move this fluid. So when we sleep, first of all, the researchers have looked at this brain pulsating in, this fluid pulsating in the brain when we sleep, and it seems to be a rhythmic, pulsatile nature when we're sleeping. And what happens, what they've observed, is that there is a decrease in neuronal activity in the brain. There's a sort of a resting state. With that resting state, blood flow comes out of the brain. There's actually a relative void of blood from the brain. And then as soon as that happens, a pulse of cerebrospinal fluid into the brain. And so if you can imagine this sort of cyclical, pulsatile, physiological happening that's happening to us when we're sleeping, is our neurons quiet, blood flows out, CSF flows in. Our neurons quiet, blood flows out, and CSF flows in. Right? So this is happening in sleep. As I said before, I argue that it also happens in other parasympathetic states as well. And so there are now proposals and hypotheses that are out that, it's sort of like, well, if this fluid is so important to get into our brain and clean out debris, could we activate this fluid in other ways? If sleep is important to clear out these toxins, does it help prevent Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that? Does it help remove inflammatory agents in the brain that might cause things like depression or dementia? And so now, including myself, there's a lot of people looking at, how does breath work change the movement of the fluid, and can this actually help prevent or decrease cognitive decline, or help prevent dementia, because you're actually able to activate the fluid. It's sort of like if you imagine a river that is flowing through us, that if the river is stagnant, debris and algae start building up in the river, and it gets murky, right? But if we continuously have the river flowing, that it stays nice and clean and clear. And that's exactly what we want the cerebrospinal fluid to do. Is we want the cerebrospinal fluid to flow like a river, and we don't want areas of stagnation in this flow. And so, besides sleep, are there other ways of moving the fluid? And we know that physiologically, the heartbeat moves the fluid. But one of the most sort of powerful conscious movements of the fluid itself is also our breath. So I find it very fascinating, right? That breath work has been done for millennia and is a powerful technique that we consciously can use. And the research around the breath is incredible. And I've given some lectures and talks about this, but it's just fascinating to me that one of the biggest movers of the breath, of the cerebrospinal fluid, that we can activate consciously is the breath. And what they've found through research is essentially that when we inhale, take an in breath in, we bring cerebrospinal fluid up to our head, up to our brain. All right. So we're actually able to consciously, with an inhale, all the way from the base of the sacrum. So imagine that there's this another pool of fluid at the base of the sacrum. All the way from the base of the sacrum, you're actually able to bring this fluid. There's a what we call a cephalad head, a cephalad movement of fluid along your entire spine to your head, into the third ventricle, which is, again, going back to the previous, is a midline space in our brain. It's where it would imagine your brow center to be, your third eye. It comes into the third ventricle. It bathes the pineal gland. It makes connections with the pituitary gland. It bathes the hypothalamus. Very important brain regulatory centers. But imagine you inhale, and when we do that, we're bringing cerebrospinal fluid up into the third ventricle. When we exhale, okay, and I'm reviewing this because it's important for the meditation that we're doing today. When we exhale from about your mid-thoracic level, which, if you can imagine, maybe somewhere between like right above your belly button, that from there down, when we exhale from there down, you actually push the fluid down into the sacrum. And there's relatively little movement in the neck and the head when we exhale. All right, so inhale, you're moving the fluid all the way from the sacrum up into the third ventricle. Exhale, you're pushing the fluid down from like your just above your belly button, let's say, down to the sacrum. All right, inhale, bring it up. Exhale, push it down. All right, so we will do this sort of analogy, but just to sort of get you thinking about it, if you are in a bathtub and let's say there is warm water by your feet and you want that warm water to come up to your head, right? There's two ways, or well, there's multiple ways of bringing it, but even kids can figure this out where, they go down to their feet and they bring the water up, right? They sort of move the water up and then they slowly feel the heat coming up towards their head. Or you're feeling nice and relaxed in your bathtub, and what do? You use your hands or your feet and you push a wave down to the wall of the bathtub, right? If you push the wave down towards your feet, towards the wall of the bathtub, then that fluid hits the wall of the bathtub and then comes back, right? So instead of pulling the fluid towards your head, you can also push it down. It hits the wall of the bathtub and then you start feeling it coming up. Okay. Well, with this process, we can do both. So essentially what we're doing is when we exhale, we create a little push down to the sacrum. We gather all the fluid that's down at the sacrum. And then with the inhale, we bring it up. And then we do it again. Exhale, push it down to the sacrum. Inhale, bring it up. Exhale, push it down to the sacrum. Inhale, bring it up. Okay. Now, people have been doing this for many years, millennia, whatever you want to call it. And we're also going to integrate a bit of a perineal activation. All right, the perineal floor is essentially is the floor that controls a lot of different functions, including urinating and defecating and things like that. It's a very, very important part of our core. Okay. And so activation of the perineal floor is similar to doing like a Kegel exercise, Or one of the best ways to describe it is if you activate the perineal floor, it's like you're peeing, you're urinating, and you need to stop midstream. Right? So what do you do if you're urinating and you need to stop midstream? That's an activation of the perineal floor. So those muscles that you can contract is an activation of the perineal floor, and we're actually going to bring that into our meditation today. Okay, Linda.
I was wondering if so I've been sick maybe too often lately, and I noticed that when I'm laying down, I feel amazing. The moment I get up, everything just comes back to me. And is there a correlation between you laying down and the CSF maybe being able to flush through the system a lot easier versus standing up?
Yes, for sure. And so, you'll notice how if you go through the program, usually what I do is we started off with eyes down. Then with the CSF meditations, I go eyes in and up and in. And this is the first, and usually I've always said, find a comfortable posture. You can be sitting or lying down. This is one where you can be sitting, but if you start initially, I do recommend people lie down, because you'll notice it doesn't have gravity to combat. And so when you're lying down, it's easier flow, let's say. So for this one, I will recommend lying down if you can. So I think you're spot on.
Thank you. I had another one. I don't know if you're going to go into it, but I know that in Kundalini ancient treatise is the act of sublimating your sexual essence. Since it is a fluid, I'm wondering if it also has the same quantum properties that the CSF might, and that's how those two.
Yeah, for sure.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go into our practice then.